we're taking what we learn from talking to our patient, palpating, listening, smelling, all of our examination methods, and we're translating it into something. We're organizing the information in a way that we can use. And then we're using it. And then the patient says, what is it that you did again? And then we have to translate it again into some sort of language that they're going to understand and that you can convey in a relatively limited amount of time.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. I'm always a bit curious and wary when my patients share with me their delicious sense of satisfaction in knowing that they have a diagnosis. The first time I noticed this was some years ago when a patient with a mosaic of odd issues said to me, "I don't care if it's cancer, I just want to know what it is." That got my attention. That rather than live with aspects of herself that were a curiosity, she so very, very needed the definitive stamp of certainty. It happened again the other day. I have a patient who I've not been able to help. Neither has her chiropractor or team of physical therapists. The radiating pain and numbness that dogs her has not markedly changed, but she has a name for her problem, and the amount of comfort that brings to her spirit, it's not insignificant. I'm one of those lower-level practitioners. I like to put my hands on people to feel what might be unfolding in my patient's physiology. I like to see changes in three-dimensional reality show up in the time that we've spent together. Maybe I think about my clinic too much as being a workshop. So when people share their thoughts, theories, and air quotes here, research about their condition, I suspect I'm missing a lot of material that a more spirit-level practitioner might pick up. For sure, it throws me a bit when physical symptoms don't shift, and the patient's story around them becomes a kind of life raft that gives them something to hold on to in the lumpy sea of uncertainty. I suspect this is part of the nut I've yet to crack in clinic. I want to respect the thoughts and sense that my patients make of their experience. Maybe there's something in there that I've missed that would give me a clue to a part of the unsolved puzzle. But like most conventional medical diagnoses, and for most part, the stories patients tell themselves about their troubles, it's usually not that helpful when I'm looking to use acupuncture to solve a problem. So I hold it all off to the side. At the same time, I found that when I'm overly focused on getting a person's problem to change, I might be leaving them behind in some way. Let me give you an example. There are times I see a pattern, and I know a few points that might be very helpful, but these are not comfortable points to needle. And for new patients, where I've yet to establish a trusted connection, I've found that an uncomfortable treatment, even if it helps, can get in the way of having them come back for another session. In my focus on getting a physical problem to shift, I might be alienating them in other ways. I'm coming to a place where I see the value in bringing people along with a feeling of comfort. Being effective with a physical problem might not be so effective if the patient does not want to continue treatment. Even if people have acupuncture in their past, there is still a period of time needed to build some trust before having at certain points. Sometimes I need to take the idea of what I want to do and translate it into a different set of points. Maybe, not unlike making sure a bitter herbal formula has some moderating sweet so as to be palatable, or the way it helps to first connect with some empathy before taking on a conflict with a loved one. I must admit, there are times when I'm wanting to knock the ball out of the park, but really, I should be aiming for a base hit. I want the people who come to my clinic to have the experience of being relieved of their problem. But as one of my patients pointed out to me years ago when he said, "I'd like to get better as fast as nature will allow," there are times that it takes time. And beyond that, to have the experience be pleasant and comfortable. I think I need to revisit that aspect of practice. It's not to be ignored in service of some imagined sense of efficiency. Too often, I've come down on the side of this might be a bit uncomfortable, but the results will be worth the temporary discomfort. So long as the treatment translates into an alleviation of troubles listed at the top of the intake form, I'd call it a success. But these days, I'm thinking how I titrate the treatment is increasingly important. Not unlike when you have bad news to deliver to somebody, you want to preface it with empathy and courageous connective honesty. I'm sure that, like me, you've had countless patients say something like, I don't know anything about acupuncture, which I think is a polite request that means, please help bring me along in a way that allows me to make some sense of what we're doing here. As Sarah Rivkin, the guest of this conversation, points out, all medicine is a kind of translation. Not just from Chinese into English, but translation into a person's experience and sense of the world. It's not just about vocabulary and words. It's about connection and the curious alchemy that comes from meaning. Qiological is delighted to have sponsors who bring you terrific services, products, and classes. Listen to this. Do you like working with palpatory diagnosis and have a taste for how the classics describe acupuncture? Slade Burris has a foundations class in neoclassical acupuncture coming up in September. Neijing your thing? Ed Neal and the Apricot Grove invite you to go deeper with nature-based medicine at the end of this month. The school season is about to begin. Stock up with formulas to keep kids healthy from Blue Poppy. Later in the show, you'll hear how Jane's AI Scribe frees you from writing clinic notes and why golden flower Chinese herbs is old-fashioned enough not to use an automated answering service. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast.
Hi, I'm Kylie Roger, and I practice neoclassical acupuncture, a palpatory style which gives you instant feedback. This style has made me more present, more precise, and it's elevated my clinical results, and I'm not alone in this. Here's what other practitioners have to say.
The neoclassical skills that I learned have really streamlined the way that I make my diagnoses, which result in a faster treatment. The patients like it, they like the results, and I'd recommend it for anyone that wants to add another skill set to their toolbox.
Practicing neoclassical acupuncture has been a life-changing experience for myself and my practice. I've seen remarkable results in my patients and gained greater confidence as a practitioner. I highly recommend.
Neoclassical acupuncture has completely changed my practice, and I love the amazing and lasting results that I see with the medicine.
Start your journey with neoclassical acupuncture with the Foundations course this September. Visit neoclassicalacupuncture.com and transform your practice.
Are you ready to recreate your practice through an in-depth study of the original writings of Chinese medicine? It all begins August 24th. Join the Apricot Grove and Dr. Edward Neal on a transformative journey into the classical roots of Chinese medicine. If you are new to the classics, their Wisdom of the Cosmos class offers a wonderful introduction to the original writings of Neijing, nature-based medicine. Do you thirst for a deeper immersion? Their highly esteemed 2-year program only runs every few years. This training in Neijing, nature-based medicine, and classical text archaeology provides a comprehensive pathway to transform your practice and develop confidence through improved clinical results. The window for this unique opportunity closes later this month. Visit neijingstudies.com to learn more and commit to a practice grounded in the Neijing text. With school right around the corner, now is the perfect time to stock up on Blue Poppy's pediatric formulas. Made with a gentle glycerin base, Blue Poppy's pediatric formulas are designed to support children throughout the school year. From Cold Quell Jr. and Jade Windscreen to remedies for teething, tummy aches, and indigestion, they taste great and work effectively. This month only, enjoy 15% off all pediatric formulas. And the best part? Blue Poppy offers free shipping on all orders over $50 with no restrictions within the continental United States. Visit bluepoppy.com today, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and updates. Sarah Rivkin, welcome back to Geological.
Thank you, Michael. I'm delighted to be back here.
It's always fun to talk with you. I've been reading through something that you sent me. It's an article. It's entitled, "What is Translation and Why Does It Matter?" It's a really lovely little article. It's like so academic. I'm so impressed. You know, I like to write, but I've never really learned to write academically. Anytime I see someone who can do this, it just kind of knocks my socks off. That you can make your mind work out that way.
Well, thank you. It's actually been, I went back and did my doctorate a few years ago. Well, 3 years ago now. And it's been kind of a nice thing, sort of personal side benefit to that, is it sort of allowed/forced me to go back to some of the things that really excited me in earlier parts of my life.
Like, what were you doing earlier?
Well, and this is going way back. I was in a dual degree program for my undergraduate that was in voice performance because I wanted to be an opera singer. And then my liberal arts degree was comparative literature, but it basically ended up being European medieval studies. And I finished college and I thought, well, either I can go be an opera singer or I can go to graduate school for medieval studies. And everybody said, go be an opera singer first. So, because graduate school will always be there, right? And if you're going to be a singer, there's certain things you need to do at certain times in your life you can't do when you're 40. So I moved to New York to be an opera singer and I started getting sick. I got colds and allergies. I think the combination of singing so much, exerting all of that lung chi, and also living in a big crowded city, going out too much, not eating well, being on packed, subways and buses and all of that. But it became apparent that I couldn't sing or I couldn't have a career as a singer if I was getting sick that often. And it was so much like the stories our patients tell us, right? You go to the doctor and they're like, there's nothing wrong with you. You just caught another cold or you just have seasonal allergies and take this medication. But all those medications are very drying, so you can't sing when you take them. So my voice teacher recommended seeing an East Asian medical practitioner, and that was what set me off on a different path.
Oh my goodness. That's so funny. It's interesting to me, the things that we've done in our life, whatever they are.
Yeah.
It's like none of it goes away. We don't throw any of it away.
Right.
It often comes along with us. And then at another point, like you pull that toolkit out. It's like, oh, I know how to use that. Hacksaw. Yep. I know how to use that.
Right.
Footnoting. No problem. Citations. I love them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's great. And they morph and change, but they're still there. I mean, if I were to try to come up with a coherent narrative for my life and my clinical practice, I've always had one foot in books and academia and literature and one in doing something active and physically engaging. And I think there is a reason why I was a singer and not, I'd been trained as a violinist and a pianist, but that never engaged me the same way. So it was the body and the text, and however many years later, it's still the body and the text. And I've really enjoyed through my academic work being able to bring those two things together because I no longer see them as separate.
Well, this is, I think, one of the wonderful messages about East Asian medicine. There are these different parts of life, these different domains, and you could look at it and go, these have nothing to do with each other, like body, mind, nothing to do with each other. Clinical practice, running a business, these aren't the same thing. These are not the droids you're looking for. But you look a little bit closer and you go, complementary, interpenetrating, each entangled deeply with the other. You can't not have one without the other. They just go together.
And all of our experiences outside of clinic, be those interactions with humans or reading something or, something else that happens with us, it's not like severance. We don't leave that at the door when we come into clinic that informs what we do, and vice versa. There is this porous border between all of it.
Porous border. Yeah, for sure. And, just to speak some to this article that I read of yours, language itself can create borders. Language itself can create domains. There's an in-group, there's an out-group. We talk this way. Those folks over there, they talk that way. I can always tell people here in the St. Louis area that are from like South County because they don't conjugate their verbs in exactly the correct fashion, but it's correct for how they talk down there.
Yeah. But language can also be a bridge, right? You can also decide, my role, my goal, part of my way of creating therapeutic benefit with my patient or in the world is in carrying this across, right? Is in translation, which literally, I just learned this and I'm embarrassed because I had Latin, but it literally means to carry something across.
Oh, translation.
Yeah.
Well, like transformation.
Like,
you have to carry across, to go across. Transportation.
Right. Yeah.
It's funny. Sometimes there are things, and it's so damn obvious. And it's so obvious you don't even notice.
Right.
And then you look at it and you go, oh, yeah, well, there it is, right in front of me.
Yeah.
So languages can be a border. They can also be a bridge.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. How's that? Because, you've got something here that's kind of academic, talking about translation.
Right. Well, there are a number of scholars, including most notably anthropologist named Sonia Pritzker, who talk about how everything we do is translation. She's building on a tradition of that. Every time we explain something, anytime we bridge some sort of larger cultural, linguistic, temporal, even interpersonal distance, anytime we use language to make that connection, that is translation. And we do that in the clinic all the time. Every time your patient asks you, what are you doing here? What does acupuncture do? You're in the middle of needling and your patient's like, what exactly is acupuncture and how does it work? Or your patient, as they're walking out the door, says, can you explain my herbal formula to me? That's all translation. That's all bridging and carrying over.
It is. So often I think we talk about it as education. I'm doing patient education. And I don't know, lately and this is probably just me, I hate the word education. I mean, the whole idea that I've got to educate somebody or that they need some education, increasingly, I don't know, it just bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
Often there's kind of a power dynamic involved, like I know and you don't, and I'm going to school you.
Well, I think it speaks to our understanding as well. I always get a little nervous when someone asks me to explain something, but it's a great opportunity for me to really see how deeply do I understand it. And you should be able to explain what you do. And you should be able to be in dialogue. And you're always going to learn something if you're open to it by the questions that you get back in return.
For sure. I used to think that there was a spiel that I could come up with if I really understood it, and if I could explain it in a way that, made me look competent, I'd have a spiel and that spiel would work for everybody. But look, this is Chinese medicine and we know that one size doesn't fit all.
Right.
One thing's not always right. And so whenever someone asks me to explain Chinese medicine, I find the first thing I have to do is not think about what am I thinking. My first thing that I think about is who is this person? How do they think? What does their world look like? How can I tell them about Chinese medicine? Translate, if you will, like you were saying. How can I tell them the story that matches a dialogue that's already running through their mind?
Exactly. And that story might be different on different days, right? Which is why having those sort of pat, answers that you've worked out ahead of time that you can just pull out, it only gets you so far.
It's true.
Right? Because your audience is always different. I'm going to explain, I see a lot of kids, and I'm going to explain things differently to a 6-year-old than I am to a 20-year-old, than I am to a 50-year-old, perhaps, or someone who I have a lot of physicians in my practice. I'm probably going to talk differently about East Asian medicine to a physician than I am to someone who's a painter.
Yes.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah. In a way, the physicians are the easiest to talk to because you have a language that you can tap into, or because they have had experiences where they've seen the limitations of what they know and what they're able to do.
Yeah.
The hardest ones are the 20-year-olds, like the smart. I've done a bunch of talks recently to college classes about our medicine. I have a few friends who are historians who've brought me into their classes. And that's a challenging audience because 20-year-olds, smart 20-year-olds, they really think they know everything.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
We did,
Yeah.
didn't we?
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
I've gotten dumber ever since I was 22, let me tell you.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So tell me about the challenges that you have with smart 20-year-olds, because, smart 20-year-olds are the people that are going to be running the world here for us.
Yeah. I mean, the smart 20-year-old, maybe they rely on what they read online. Maybe they're more conversant with that than someone else. They're fact checking you in real time, at least that population. You say something and right away they've Googled it to see, what other people think about it. Both, is that supported by the scientific evidence, or did some other practitioner say something different online that doesn't make sense, and now you're defending what else is out there on the internet?
Yeah, I do talk to smart 20-year-olds. I got a daughter that age. I take that back. She doesn't fact check me, though. No, I hadn't thought about that as a thing that people would do because they've got the world of knowledge at their fingertips, and they grew up with that. And it had not occurred to me that you could be listening to a speaker, and instead of like listening and trying to get what the speaker has to say, you're already having a debate with them in your mind, and the capacity to be like, wait, what about this? I read on Reddit, right? Or I just found this thing in Perplexity AI and it says blah, 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 blah. I hadn't thought about like what that means in terms of communication. We're back to bridges and borders, right? What does it mean when you have a kind of consciousness where you constantly want to double check it against some kind of digital authority? That's a very interesting place to stand in. I had not considered that.
Yeah, and it does something to the relationship. We might work so hard on building a rapport with someone, and then everything you say is being fact-checked, which is challenging.
Well, that's a whole different conversation. I could easily go down that rabbit hole with you.
We don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
No. I don't think we do. I'm just noticing that we could. It's a really interesting comment on just culture, social structure, how people make sense of things. But this is what you're talking about with translation, how you make sense of things. Like you could take some simple characters, like Fang or some of the other ones that you've weighed. There's sometimes simple characters and they've got a meaning, but like the word that you use to translate it, it'll give it a kind of flavor or direction or nuance or lack of nuance. And because it has a different feeling, it has a different meaning.
Right. And we do that all the time. And, as I wrote in that article, Fang, and forgive my tones, they're awful. Fang is the one that really sort of got me on this path, because Fang is what we typically translate as, formula or method, right? Mm-hmm. And then I started spending time with historians of Chinese medicine, and they were talking about recipes, this book of recipes, that book of recipes, this collection of recipes. And talk about embarrassing revelations. It took me a long time before I traced it back and realized we were both talking about Fang. And when I use the word formula, what kind of connotations and ideas and biases and, direction does that give my patient that I'm talking about your herbal formula, right? I mean, formulas are esoteric and they're proprietary. There's the secret formula for Coca-Cola or the secret formula for this multi-billion-dollar new cancer drug or whatever it is, versus recipe. A recipe is like what your grandma does, right? Which we don't value the same way we value a formula. So what kind of conditions do using those different words set up in terms of ideas in people's brains? The listener, the patient, the reader who, isn't tracing it back to Chinese. If we give our patient a formula, we're professionals, right? We've come up with this proprietary custom blend of substances that's exactly suited to our patient's condition, versus a recipe. It's like, oh yeah, my grandma used to tell me to put an onion on my foot when I had hemorrhoids or, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. The connotation that it stirs in the mind. And I can see that too, because especially say 20, 30 years ago, as an acupuncturist or East Asian medicine practitioner, we were wanting to look somewhat professional. Like this is a real thing. So I've got this formula. Sometimes I remember calling them prescriptions because prescription is more than professional. It's medical. Like I've got an herbal prescription for you. It's like, woo, that sounds like medicine.
Yeah, I was just reading something today. There's a new book out on translation that I just read on Friday. And one of the points that the author made was that when Freud was translated into English, they made him sound scientific. Whereas if you read him in German, he's using very kind of colloquial, everyday language to describe stuff like ego and id and like all these terms that come from Latin that we associate with Freud. He was using self and he was using I. He was using words that would be familiar to people. And somehow when he was translated, there was a sense of, we need to make psychiatry something professional instead of this pseudoscience. So we're going to choose to use these scientific words. And we do exactly the same thing in East Asian medicine. But they're different things we do, right? Sometimes we want to seem professional and scientific and medical. So then we might use formula or prescription. Sometimes, again, like know your audience, right? The sort of anti-authoritarian patient who doesn't trust the corporate, medical system, they might do better. They might be more responsive if you call it a recipe, right? They might prize the wisdom of their elders over what's been developed in a lab. So then maybe you want to use recipe with them.
I think we do this naturally as humans, being language-using creatures that we are. At least I know that I do it. I'm kind of a malleable sort of person. And so I often find my language shifting a bit depending on who I'm around. The words I use, the cadence, tone, all of it will shift depending on who's around me because I want to be in some kind of congruence. And one of the easiest ways to do that is mirror what the other person's doing. It happens very naturally.
Right. It's like the people from the county near you who don't conjugate their verbs, right?
They conjugate them, but not the way I learned in school. Although many kids on the playground conjugated their verbs that way.
Yeah.
On the playground, I'd speak one way. In class, I'd speak a different.
Right. Yeah. And we all do that, particularly when we're talking about this medical system.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about the challenges of translation as you see it these days. Because up until about 10 minutes ago, this was a very, very human thing where you'd have to learn the language that you wanted to work in. Of course, hopefully know your own language. And if there's a professional aspect to it, know that. And then it was a very human effort of going from here to there.
Yeah.
We've had wars about that in the Chinese medicine community about how we say certain things, right? Is it repletion or is it excess?
Yeah, it's a very different landscape. And that was also something that I felt like I needed to address because there was a lot written about all of this, but it stopped around 10 years ago. There hasn't been that much written about it in our profession since. And as you said, we're in a totally different landscape than we were 10 years ago. The rise of AI and machine translation, it's a very different animal. The exception, I would say, is if you've ever tried putting classical Chinese into one of these programs, it is still a garbled, comical mess. It still doesn't work. But modern Chinese, I mean, I've done this before and I've thought about teaching a class on it, how you can get contemporary scientific articles from Chinese, even if you don't speak Chinese, right? You can almost do it all just with the digital tools that are available there. If you know your search terms to search on, and you can get an article from a journal and you can run it through Google Translate, and it will do pretty well at a lot of what is there. It breaks down on things like, if it's Chinese medicine article, treatment principles, herb names, it gets a little wonky. Those things, for better or worse, those may be the most important things in the article that you're trying to machine translate. But, a lot of the rest, it does a pretty decent job. So I think what's the same is that translating is also reading. It's also bringing your own understanding into a text. And hopefully as a practitioner and as a practitioner with some experience and some knowledge, you're bringing in a whole different set of associations into a text and you're adding some value there. And that still hasn't been replaced by the machines, is the value that you add, because the machines are still mimicking. But if you want to know like the signs and symptoms in a case study or something like that, like he had a headache for 2 days, the machines can handle that.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software built to help you focus on what matters most, your patients. Building rapport with your patients during appointments is important, and that can be challenging when you're also trying to collect timely and detailed documentation. That's why Jane built AI Scribe to help you document important information without the manual note-taking. This feature transforms your session recordings into chart entries. All you have to do is review your notes, sign the chart, and you're done. And since security is a top priority at Jane, AI Scribe was built securely in-house to be fully HIPAA and PIPEDIA compliant. With a tool you can trust, Jane helps you spend more time on patient care. Learn more about how Jane can help change how you feel about documentation. Head to meet.jane.app/documentation to book a demo or sign up. And if you're ready to go, be sure to use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Yeah, and that's not difficult.
No.
The trickier part is, and I'm thinking as a practitioner right now, whether I'm reading something in Chinese or reading in English or a translation or some kind of machine thing, again, as you were saying earlier, everything we do is translation. And so me as the practitioner of 20 plus years will read through something in a different way than me, the practitioner who have been at it for 5 years, because we bring ourselves and our experience and our own, for lack of a better word, database of understanding to it.
Yeah. And that, I think, is another thing that has changed in the past 10 to 20 years. I think there's more acknowledgement of bias and acknowledgement that we are human and we do have biases. And we need to acknowledge them and be transparent about them. But to pretend that we aren't biased or to pretend that there is some sort of absolute perfect way of doing something that is utterly without bias, I don't think anybody talks like that anymore. And that's very relevant to translation as well. Marnie Ergel, Sharon Weizenbaum, and I are working on a translation together, and we're retranslating something that Paul Unschuld did. And we have very different reactions to the texts. You know, we're practitioners, all three, them more than I, even quite experienced practitioners. We have opinions about the text. We've been wrestling with these ideas for, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And we're going to come to the reading very differently. And because we're reading it differently and having different reactions to it, we're going to translate it differently. And we're not pretending that we're not going to, versus an academic who, has deep linguistic and cultural and historical knowledge, but they don't have the tactical, practical kind of kinesthetic experience of the text or of the medicine.
Yeah, that would change it. It reminds me a little bit of like Newtonian physics, which assumes that you can stand outside of a system, observe it, measure it, take calculations, make predictions. You can stand outside of it, watch it, and predict it, right? That's a very academic way of looking at it, too, that idea that there is such a thing as objectivity. Then you get into like the more modern physics, which I don't even begin to understand, other than subjectivity is built into it.
Yeah.
It's not possible to observe a phenomena without affecting the phenomena. That's a very Chinese medicine idea. And so hearing you talk about the three of you with all that experience, you've already been wrestling with the stuff anyway. That'll give you a perspective. You have clinical experience. Of course, you're going to have a very different relationship to that material. You're not trying to hold yourself outside of it.
Yeah, we're in it. We've been bathing in it for many years.
Yeah. And that's not a bug. That's a feature.
Right.
Of that kind of translation.
And that's probably why you need to keep translating, right? You need to translate stuff at different ages and stages. And, as the culture shifts, as the language shifts, some translations will stand the test of time, but often they're particular to a certain time and place and where the world, that's Chinese medicine too, right? Is that things aren't so fixed, or East Asian medicine, right? Things aren't so fixed. They change, and we have to, health is adaptation.
You just did it with your language right now.
Yeah.
You said Chinese medicine, and you instantly said, nope, East Asian medicine. But it's like East Asian medicine, Oriental medicine, Chinese medicine, non-Western medicine. There's different ways to say it. There's different aspects that you can point. There is medicine that is Chinese medicine. It's more Chinese than Japanese, maybe, right? Or there's some that's Korean. I run into this all the time. because sometimes I'll say something and then get a look like, you shouldn't talk that way. That's not the right word. How dare you? And so, I mean, that's also a part of the changing time of culture and everything that goes with it.
Yeah. And when you're translating something that was the vernacular, right? It was the way, I guess you can't say that necessarily for these texts, but what I was going to say was that if you're translating something that is a reflection of the way people communicated at the time, if part of that act of translation, you could argue, is changing it temporally as well as linguistically, not only bringing it into another language, but bringing it into another time. And how do you do that?
Yes, which is why I have so much trouble at times with words like Shen, spirit. Like, what were they referring to?
Yeah.
With that, it's so easy to think, oh yeah, spirit, I know what that is. Well, I know what it is as a 20 and 21st century American. I've got an idea of what that is, but like, what did that mean to someone in Song Dynasty China or Edo period Japan?
Yeah.
So how do you work with that kind of stuff? How's that?
Oh, that's tricky. I mean, in our translation, the one that I'm doing with Sharon and Marnie, there are certain words that we've certainly left in the original Chinese. But I think that's kind of the convention now, right? People don't translate Shen so much anymore. They might put a footnote there, but they're not going to call it spirit. And that's another convention that's changed. People are going to use qi. They're not going to use vital energy or whatever weird terms that were used. Qi has become a word in English, you know, as any Scrabble player can tell you, right? We've now...
Great word in Scrabble.
Yeah. I mean, but we've now adopted it. And that was something, I forget what year that was, but I came across that in my research, you know, just as a sign of how these concepts have come into our culture as well. What better way to show that than the fact they're now considered English words, you know, yin and yang and qi and all of that.
Are they English words or are they placeholders for something that's in our culture, but maybe we don't quite understand?
Well, they're borrowings, right? Every language borrows terms from other languages, or most other languages. I think in France, they try to gatekeep a bit. They have the Académie Française preventing foreign words from getting into their language. I don't know if that works anymore, but there are so many English words that are just borrowings from other languages. But it's a challenge as a translator. And even things like, do you italicize it, right? So generally putting something in italics means you're acknowledging that it's foreign. You're recognizing that it isn't English yet. Or do you not italicize it? You know, do you capitalize it? Does blood get capitalized or does it not get capitalized? And, you know, yin and yang, and even do you put in the tone marks? All of these are discussions to have.
Does it depend, too, on who the audience is? Because I'm thinking for Chinese medicine practitioners, you know, we would just see that word in English. I would think regardless, italic, bold, capital, whatever, tone marks, we just go, oh, yeah, I know what that is. Qi.
I think it absolutely depends on who you're writing for. Yeah. I mean, in everything you do. And that's the other thing about a translation that's a scholarly translation, like, you know, Paul Unschuld's version of this text versus our version of this text. What are people going to do with it? You know, and you have to be cognizant of that, because a practitioner is going to take that text and they're going to say, wow, that's a cool herbal formula. You know, I had never heard of that. I'm going to try it the next time I have a patient that seems to match that presentation. And you have to be mindful of that as a translator if that's the audience you're writing for. You know, that's very different than someone who's just curious about the use of, I don't know, Dongui in the Song Dynasty or something like that, because they're studying, you know, trade routes along the Silk Road. But they're reading the text for different information. And
right.
I might say the stakes are higher for the translator when they know the reader is actually going to give someone the thing that they're talking about. But I don't know, the stakes are high for the historian as well. They're just different.
Yeah, and somewhere there's this idea that there's a standard. Standards are really, really helpful because they're agreements that you don't get fact-checked on.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a very interesting thing about having now gone to a few conferences of Chinese medical or East Asian medical historians, is that some of the things that they say and talk about and some of the ways they interpret things, I think may be a function of having just read about these things and not having done them. Or we've been misinformed as practitioners. Someone's oversimplified at some point down the road because they say, it's unclear what the original says, so I'm just going to make a decision based on what makes the most sense to me, even if it's wrong.
That's interesting.
And this is a discussion, actually, I want to have with a friend of mine who's a historian, because I really want to know, have the practitioners been sort of, I don't know, has it been dumbed down for us? Or are there things in these texts that you really can't understand just by reading them? You really have to do it. And once you do it, the ambiguities will seem less ambiguous.
Yes, I see your point. Even as a first or second year student reading it, it might be hard to understand, but after some experience, you go, oh yeah, that's actually crystal clear now. And if you're not writing for a medical crowd and you come across this thing, well, maybe that's just an error in how it was written.
Yeah.
I know in some of the work that I've done, I'd come across things and I didn't get it. Is that a miswritten word? Do I not understand the grammar structure? Do I just don't understand the word period? Or I somehow miss an important concept 2 sentences up above.
Right.
That clarified it.
Well, you've translated yourself.
I did 10 key formula family some years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm sure you've run into these things as well.
Oh my God, years of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really weird thinking that someone could take that book in Chinese right now, run it through any of the large language models, and get what took me 2 years to produce in terms of Chinglish, and then I had to go through and clean it up and turn it into regular English.
Yeah. The other thing I can't imagine is, people who are scholars of this medicine who have no practical experience in it and how they're ever able to understand any of these texts, right? Like, how do you understand it just as this abstract thing without having done it?
I don't know. Ask Paul Unshold.
Right. Yeah.
Some people just having a thing for, I don't know, medieval history.
Right. Right. Exactly. Well, Paul Unshold's been doing this for a very long time. And his life's work at this point is translating the Bangsao Gunmu. He gets up. I heard him lecture a couple of years ago. That's what he does at this point. Like, he has a 9-to-5 job or 8-to-6 job, or, however many hours a day he works. And it's translating this text, at least in terms of how he reports it. This is all he does.
Wow. That's dedication.
Right? Like, some people get up and they go to the office and they, make widgets for 8 hours. He gets up and he, works on this text for 8 hours a day. And he's been doing this for, I don't know, how old is he? I think he's about 80.
He's been at it a long time.
Yeah.
He's been prolific.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he has
That's for
helpers.
Sure. I would hope so.
Yeah. Yeah.
We all do at a certain point.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I'm just back to this thing that you said earlier. Everything is translation. And there was something else that you had said about that it's not possible to not be biased in some way. So the trend these days is to be clear with your biases in the work you do. Did I get that right?
I don't know if I'm right, but that's what I believe right now until someone knocks me off of that stool.
Well, I was just looking through Reddit here and no, just kidding. The question I have about that, because it makes sense to me. Like, know who you are, know where you are, know what this is for, be clear about it, set a context. But it can be really hard to set a context for the biases that you're looking through when so many biases are unconscious to us.
Yeah. Well, I describe myself as an expat when it comes to this cultural context, right? Like, I've been living in this world for over 20 years now, but I'm never going to escape who I am and where I came from. As much as I can acculturate myself to this and try to learn and study. And I think that's ethical, right? To always be trying to learn more, to always be understanding more, but with the acknowledgement that, you're never going to get there. It's a lifelong process and you're always going to make mistakes, and, you're going to try your best to be humble about it and keep going and keep learning and keep growing. That's the best I can do.
How do you become aware of your biases?
I think through having conversations. I think through learning, through having conversations, for welcoming inquiry, for continuing to read and write and get criticized. And yeah, I mean,
it's an ongoing process.
Oh, yeah.
Ongoing exploration in a sense.
I mean, we learn so much from our patients, right? We learn so much from our colleagues. We need to be open to that. from our children if we have adolescents who call us out on our, oh, mom, people don't say that anymore. You can't say that. You can't do that.
I know it's funny, isn't it? But I just said it. Yeah, but you shouldn't.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see what you mean by expat. Sometimes I feel more like I'm a foreigner, and more than just a foreigner, but an intruder.
Yeah.
In the younger, this is going to sound terrible, but I'm going to say it anyway. But in the younger generations, I feel like an intruder. You shouldn't talk that way. You shouldn't behave that way. You shouldn't think that way.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me. I don't feel like an expat. I feel like I'm like over some border and I don't have a visa to visit.
Well, yeah, I understand that. And I certainly think that's some people's perspective. But, East Asian medicine is such an incredible gift to the world. I don't think it does anybody any good to keep it siloed. And in fact, I think everybody who I talk to, the scholars I talk to from China and other countries in Asia, they're delighted to have this medicine spread because they feel so passionately about it. And you probably got to know, I don't know if you got to know Dr. Huang, from translating his book, but I think that's something I've heard him say and other teachers who do teach foreign students is that it needs to spread. It needs to go elsewhere. But at the same time, you as the person who's studying and engaging it from a different culture and a different perspective, you need to be aware and sensitive to the fact that this isn't yours. And, bringing this back to translation, 20 years ago or what have you, there was this language where they called it source and target. So the source language is the language you start in, and then the target is the language you're going to. And I heard a very lovely reframing of this dichotomy, of this yin-yang pair, whatever we want to call it, as host and guest.
Oh, that's very Chinese medicine.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're a guest in someone else's house. I'm a guest. I'm the expat. I'm the foreigner. And as a guest, there are certain obligations that you have in terms of deference to your host, right? In terms of recognizing that you're there at their discretion and that you need to be respectful and aware of what the rules and norms are of the culture of the environment that you're stepping into.
Those can be some rough lessons.
Oh, yeah.
I remember Dr. Wang Jui saying that he thought the West, acupuncture in the West, is what was going to save acupuncture. That acupuncture coming to the West, where it could flourish in kind of an unfettered way compared to the China that he grew up and practiced in, that the way that it could develop in this foreign soil would be a great benefit to acupuncture.
I've heard that as well. Well, we always appreciate, it's sort of like if you grow up with something and it's just part of the wallpaper, you don't even notice it anymore, but someone else comes in and they're like, wow, your grandmother makes this dish, that's amazing. And then all of a sudden, like, you feel like, oh, yeah, that is amazing. Someone else has noticed it. The last article I wrote, I had used this idea of a seed bank, or that sometimes things need to go out in order to come back in. It's like I have dear friends who are from Nepal, and my friend's dad was a historian of Nepalese culture and history, and he was the private secretary to the king of Nepal. So, he was very high up in that world. And I remember the dad, this revered Nepali scholar, coming to visit, and he was so excited because he had learned about yoga. And he'd learned about yoga from TV. He didn't learn about yoga from his great uncle or his grandfather or whomever, and he started going on and on. Have you heard about this yoga thing? They have a program on TV and I've been doing yoga, learning yoga from TV. So it's funny how things kind of move and circulate, and ideas have always done that. And it's always gone back and forth.
I think you're right about that. I think ideas, especially good ones,
Mm-hmm.
have always moved and always circulated.
Yeah. And there's an ethical way to engage with that.
Tell me more about that. I'm curious about that because, I hear a lot these days. And again, I don't even have gray hair anymore. I got white hair. So I hear things about cultural appropriation. And honestly, I don't quite understand it. I hear about it. I know that it's a thing, but I'm also a little confused because in my experience, when cultures come together and exchange with each other, we get fusion cooking. We get like really cool fashions. We get music, like blends of music that you never otherwise get when you put some hip hop with some, instrumental pygmy drum music. I mean, there's so many ways that cultures come together and co-evolve together, that makes the world so much richer. At the same time, yeah, I get it that you can take things that were not yours to take and merchandise them in a way that's unethical. But in terms of our Chinese medicine, I'd like to get more of your thoughts. Translation, bridging, communicating, being respectful to where it comes from, and also, Dr. Wang Jui's idea that this medical technology, for lack of a better word, has landed in a foreign soil and is growing with the nutrients of that soil. It's becoming another thing, but strong and vital. So I'd just like to get your thoughts on that.
I think it's very complicated because the other thing that I think sometimes gets lost is that these exchanges have always gone both ways. My understanding is that some of the ideas around anatomy and physiology and even like meridians and all of that came from Europe and then went to Asia and then came back. Or, I know people talk about this in the context of massage techniques going back and forth and, medicinal substances going back and forth. And, we have this idea, like, I think maybe part of it is we over sort of exoticize, is that the word? What we're not familiar with.
If not, you just made one up and it's a good word, too.
Right. I was very surprised. I was in Germany, I guess about 1.5 years ago for a conference. We went to a castle that had a medical history museum, and they had an old apothecary there. And this was an apothecary for some German prince or duke or somebody like that. And almost all the herbs in there or medicinal substances were things that I was familiar with from East Asian medicine. So where does it start? Where did it go? Certainly some plants, some substances that are commonly used in one place may have grown somewhere else, may have come into the culture. It wasn't just commodities that went back and forth and were traded back and forth, but knowledge about how to use them. So I think all these issues are very complicated. And there is a power dynamic and there is a history of colonialism. But, China was an empire too. The Europeans didn't conquer China really, so that power dynamic then becomes a little tricky as well. And I do think, too, about Western classical music, which was, the other tradition that I'm familiar with, and how much richer is it because there are all these tremendous practitioners of that craft who are from China, who are from Japan, who are from Korea. How much vitality has it injected into this tradition to have it spread? I had a number of colleagues, a couple who moved to Asia because they were writing curricula and involved in pedagogical systems. And in China and Japan, they were like, yes, give us more of that. And the US, they were saying, oh, who needs to learn how to play the violin or the piano or to read music? That's not important. So it's not the same situation with East Asian medicine, but I think there are analogs, as you say, for other important human inventions. Chinese medicine is something that UNESCO designated as a World Cultural Heritage. There's certain things that were designated as this is really important, and for the sake of humanity and the planet, we need to hold on to it. And Chinese medicine was one of those things. So, yeah, it shouldn't be kept secret or kept siloed.
Golden Flower Chinese Herbs is celebrating 35 years of existence. Wow, what a journey it's been. It started because the baby boom generation was frustrated with conventional medicine. In the 1970s, there was a resurgence of interest in what was considered natural healing modalities. After President Nixon's visit to China, acupuncture started to emerge from the Chinese community's into greater awareness. It was a magical moment. 2025 is the 50th anniversary of the legal practice of acupuncture in the state of California. Oh my, the awareness and access to acupuncture has grown incredibly. So much has changed since back then. But some hasn't. Like many companies, Golden Flower Chinese Herbs does a lot of business through their excellent website. But they still have real humans who answer the phones. You won't get lost in a voicemail messaging maze when you call. Like our medicine, Golden Flower Chinese Herbs is a bit old-fashioned. Visit them at gfcherbs.com or pick up the phone and give them a call. Well, there's certainly been plenty of secrets over the years, especially in Chinese culture, right? If you had a family tradition of treating something in specific formulas, recipes, if you will, secret recipes, you didn't let the outsiders, other doctors in the area, know what it was because it was bad for your business, right? There's been plenty of trade secrets.
Yeah. Well, there were also, though, times in history where, sort of religious and ethical movements argued against that these things were so important and that we had an obligation to our fellow human and to moderate their suffering. So how can you keep it secret? Knowledge should be more public. And that's in the tradition as well.
Both ways.
Both ways.
Right? On one hand,
yeah.
We've got something very helpful, very unique, and we're not going to tell everybody because you know what? That's bad for our business.
Right.
On the other hand, we want to relieve suffering for as many people as possible. So again, so often we're back to that yin-yang. On one hand, this is my personal thing. On the other hand, I want to be helpful to everybody. You have a good idea. Well, everybody should share that. Well, but I worked 30 years to understand it. So why should I just give it away?
Yeah, I mean, we're still grappling with that, right?
Yeah, I think it's just a human endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's just my suspicion. I don't know.
Well, it all goes back. I mean, you've connected a lot of this back to, how you run a practice.
Well, look, we're both clinicians, and I think all these discussions here on Qiological center around that shared experience of being with people and wanting to be helpful.
Yeah. But that you need to make a living or it's not sustainable.
Well, there's that, right? I mean, attending to the business is also a piece of the practice, not disconnected.
Yeah.
Or maybe I should say disconnected at your peril.
Right. And communication is an important part of that, right? Language is an important part of that. That gets back to translation as well. How do you connect with people? What do you share? What do you choose to communicate?
Yeah. Again, I so appreciate that point you bring up, that translation. It's not just going from one language to another. It's going from one worldview to another. You might speak a common parlance, right? We speak English with our patients. At least I think most of us do. And even in English, just because we're speaking English, it doesn't mean that we're communicating effectively at all.
Right. Well, we're always translating. We're always translating from our experience to our patient's experience and vice versa.
There's a great magic show that I saw on TV. I think it was Netflix or Amazon, called, can I remember the name? In and of Itself. And it's got a great line in it. It's got a great line. The great line goes, we are all unreliable narrators of each other's experience, which I think gets to the gist of, I think what we're trying to do is just transfer meaning to each other.
Yeah. Well, it's chi as well, right?
Meaning is a kind of chi.
Yeah. It's it's intention. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I'm curious to know this translation that you're working on with Sharon and Marnie.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk about it a little bit? Or is it not ready for prime time yet?
Well, we're hoping to get it. It may be a little bit ambitious at this point. This journal that I've published in before, Chinese Medicine and Culture, in which I now peer review a lot for as well. They have a special issue coming up on translation and terminology. So we were hoping to get it ready to submit to that at the end of March. So we started out, it was sort of arbitrary. We started out working on Suen 5 because it's relatively short, but we've now been working on it for a year because we can spend an hour and a half talking about one character and how we're going to translate it. And we've been, going over it again and again. So yeah, that's where we're at this point.
Suen 5. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah. So
can you give us just a little taste of the approach you're taking and how you're thinking about Suen 5 now compared to how you were thinking about Suen 5 when you were first starting the project?
Oh gosh. There are certain things like active language versus passive language that I think we've changed on a little bit. And dealing with classical Chinese, so much of it is contextual. And once you get to the end, you might change what you think about in the beginning because you are operating in a different context. I'm trying to think of some specific examples. You're going to have to give me a minute, or I'm going to have to come back to you on that one.
We come back to it if it comes to mind.
Yeah. I mean, also in terms of structure and cadence, how much of that do we want to keep? How much of that, quite often in classical Chinese, you may have two characters that are relatively close in meaning. And whereas in modern Chinese, they just kind of get allied. In classical, you have to think about, do I want to find two words in English that are relatively close to each other in meaning? Do I like the way that sounds? Or do I just like one term? So it's those sort of discussions that we've gone back and forth on.
It's a geeky pursuit.
It's a geeky pursuit. Yeah.
It's a geeky pursuit. I mean, when you're getting down to those individual characters and getting a sense of what they mean and how they are individually and how they are together, it becomes so textured. And it really forces you to get clear with your own sense of what it is. Maybe this is where the bias piece comes in, and recognizing that, me as the person with the experiences that I've had, I read this character like this. This makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I hope you get it in time because I'd love to read it.
Yeah. Thank you.
That would be great.
Oh, I guess the other thing that I was just looking at the translation there, that we've talked about is, big conversations about the nature of yin and yang and qi, right? Is yin qi actually stuff? Is it a substance or is it a process? Things like that we've gone back and forth on. Are yin and yang, are they qualities or are they movements? And
can't they be both and?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, this is where the Chinese language and where Chinese medicine gets so interesting for me and so slippery, because there are ways of holding your eyes in just such a way. It's like, now I'm looking at the process of the thing. And then you look a different way and you can see the thing of the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's tricky, right? And are they describing, when they give the name of a point, are they actually describing that acupuncture point, or are they describing something else? These are the things you have to figure out.
You mean like the name of the point is a description of what it does, or the...
No, about, where something goes or how it enters, where the qi goes. Is it actually the anatomical point as we know it today? Is it a region? It's very different for a translator, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a situation, I'm just putting on my translator hat for a second. I want to try to be as true to the text as possible. Maybe I've got a comment on that text. Right. As a practitioner. But if I'm translating it, I think I'd want to take what I think the author is saying. And then, of course, there's the clinical experience of going in and seeing, what does that actually mean in the clinic? Is it even true for me in clinic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But what is the author saying? That's not always clear.
Yeah. Well, there's that. It's good to have challenging work.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wonderful. Translation is such a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
Again, there's the objective, what does it say? And then there's that nuanced, what does it mean? Mm-hmm. Which I think is very much like the experience of really being in clinic.
Right.
There's what the patient says, and that's one thing. And then there's what they mean. That's a whole different thing sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I suspect means we're back to where we started. We've taken a nice long walk around the block. Everything we do is translation.
Well, diagnosis is translation, right?
Ooh.
I mean, we're taking what we learn from talking to our patient, palpating, listening, smelling, all of our examination methods, and we're translating it into something. We're organizing the information in a way that we can use. And then we're using it. And then the patient says, what is it that you did again? And then we have to translate it again into some sort of language that they're going to understand and that you can convey in a relatively limited amount of time, because they probably don't want to spend their whole day with you.
No. And we don't want to spend our whole day with them.
Yeah.
They've got things to do and we do too.
Yeah.
But yeah. Diagnosis is translation. I know it's exploration.
Yeah.
I always think of it as a hypothesis. I'm testing this, I'm testing that. But thinking of it as translation, that's helpful too. It's so cool. The medicine is very poetic.
Yeah.
But it's also phenomenally practical that way. I really appreciate your perspectives on this. Thank you for spending a little time today.
Of course, my pleasure.
I love conversations like this that take the idea, in this case, translation, and pop the frame. Not just from word swapping to making meaning, but to realizing how much of our clinical work is about how to intermingle worldviews. Sarah's perspective is a reminder that everything we do, diagnosis, treatment, patient dialogue, it's a kind of bridge building. And the tools we use, language, metaphor, story, cadence, and tone, it's not about having a perfect scholarly or scientific explanation, but finding the right way to convey meaning for the person who's in front of us. Sarah's insight into how much weight even a single word can carry, formula or recipe, spirit or shun, these aren't just linguistic choices. They're ways of skillfully using language to shape the way medicine is understood and received. And it's not static. Translation is alive. It's porous. It shifts with culture, with audience, and with time. Being the opinionated fellow that I am, I appreciated how candid she was about bias. Not trying to erase it, but to be transparent and embracing of it. That sense of being a respectful guest in another culture's house, at the same time, recognizing our own sensibilities and holding them lightly, it's something valuable that we can carry into our work and relationships. I've spent some time over the years working with translating Chinese into English. It's been a helpful exercise in exploring how the world gets named from another cultural perspective. And I've been a practitioner for long enough to realize the truth in what Sarah shares, that the practice of medicine itself, it's a kind of translation. Because in the clinic with a patient, we are continually looking for how to connect and create a meaningful and healing exchange. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.